Ramsayer's article was severely criticized in the United States and severely criticized in Korea. But in Japan, I'm afraid it is like the saying we have, it has legs. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Peterson with the Frog Outside the Well Research Center. And today I have a guest, a young man that I just met online, Joshua Kim. Joshua, why don't you introduce yourself to me and to my audience?
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 김지민입니다. 저는 조지아에서 고등학교 다니고 있습니다. 이제부터 영어로 말하겠습니다. Hello, my name is Joshua Kim, and I'm a second-generation Korean-American born in the U.S. Firstly, I would just like to thank you, Dr. Peterson, for this opportunity to come onto your channel and discuss an important geopolitical issue that I am very interested in and to share some of my experiences. So last year, I was selected to be a reporter for a project called 대한민국 바로 알리기 by the National Association of Korean Schools, or NACS, which aimed to correct misconceptions about Korean history and culture. I chose to cover the topic of the comfort woman after hearing of Harvard professor Mark Ramsayer's historically inaccurate article on that same topic. And so today I would like to discuss the comfort woman with you and learn more about this important issue.
Well, that's very good. I'm happy to talk with you about the comfort women. And, you know, I did a couple of recordings already about Mark Ramsayer and his article. I'd like to say one thing about that right now, and that is Ramsayer's article was severely criticized in the United States and severely criticized in Korea. But in Japan, I'm afraid it is like the saying we have, it has legs, which means it survives in Japan. It's recognized in Japan, and the Japanese think that it's a worthy article because it was written by a Harvard law professor. And although objectively, critically, the article has been debunked and shown to be full of all kinds of errors and all kinds of flaws, but I think that it is surviving very well in Japan. It has legs. It has legs because the Japanese authorities like it, and they like the way it serves their purpose and reinforces their point of view. So bottom line is Ramsayer's article was completely debunked in English and in Korean, but it serves its purpose in Japan, and its purpose was to reinforce Japanese conceptions of innocence about the comfort woman issue. So that's the first thing that I want to say about where that article is now and the larger impact it's had, that it's worthless in English and in Korean, but it has a tremendous value in Japan. You have some questions?
In order to raise awareness on comfort women through education, I have taken 3 actions. First, I developed a pamphlet for use in Korean and public schools to educate students about comfort women. Second, I created and distributed a survey to assess comfort women education currently in Korean schools. And lastly, I have reached out to members of Congress appealing for comfort women education to be implemented in the public school curriculum, specifically to senators in Georgia. I actually reached out to Senator Raphael Warnock, and whenever he responded, he suggested I should contact my local member of the Georgia Board of Education so that this can be included in the Georgia High School World Curriculum. But after I tried reaching out to them, I was unable to receive a reply. How do you think I can expand and further this project?
Well, you've got a good start. You've got a good start. And this kind of social action, political action takes time. And it takes effort, and it takes repetition and repetition and repetition. So you've started off well. And now if you work with other people to similarly petition to the Board of Education, eventually you can win. And the Board of Education, boards of education around the country listen to people. And if you talk enough and are persuasive and have good evidence, then you can get your point of view into the curriculum. So you've got a good start.
Thank you for that advice. I do think this is an important issue that we should learn about, because while it is something that happened many years ago, and it is something that happened in Korea, I think it still has ramifications, especially since, sexual violence in times of war is still very prevalent in our world today. So for my second question, as a high schooler, it is difficult to impact change on a large scale, especially in matters that involve powerful government entities. But if you do want to get involved, what do you think young people can do to help?
Well, I think you're doing the right thing. You're working with NACS. NACS has recognized you, and you can work with other people. You can make presentations to school board meetings. Yeah, so you're on the right track. You've got a good start. So keep up the good work.
In recent years, ultra-conservative factions within the leading Liberal Democratic Party of Japan have attempted to cover up war crimes committed by Imperial Japan during World War II, and former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe even made many comments that denied the existence of the comfort women system. And many Japanese history textbooks tend to not acknowledge the Japanese military's role in coercing the comfort women. Textbooks that used to elaborate on the comfort women system using sexual slavery have often been revised to include less detailed excerpts or completely omit them entirely. What do you think has prompted this push towards historical revisionism in Japan's educational system recently?
Yeah, that's a real problem. As I mentioned at the outset, this conservative wing of the LDP in Japan really likes the Ramsayer article. And it's not just by itself, it is, as you just indicated, part of a wide-ranging conservative movement of denying the war crimes of Japan. This is a big problem. And I like to compare Japan, the World War II Axis power, with the other part of the Axis, that's Germany. And Germany admits its mistakes. Germany criticizes Nazis
Right.
all over the place. Germany, if someone has a Nazi flag or a Nazi movement, they can be fined. But in Japan, they have the flag of the rising sun. They tried to fly it during the Olympics. It was criticized and they weren't allowed to do it. I have nothing encouraging to say to you about what's going on in Japan. At this point, it looks hopeless, but what we can do is make sure that people in Korea and in the United States understand the factual matter, even though Japan is devoted totally to distortions.
I noticed that you brought up the example of Germany and how it's trying to distance itself from its own Nazi past, but Japan has kind of failed to do so. And do you think maybe there's some sort of cultural thing within Japan that is the reason behind this, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. What's going on in Japan these days is they are looking at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nothing else. They are playing the victim of the only country in the world that's been bombed with an atomic bomb. And they don't talk about Pearl Harbor. They don't talk about Nanjing. They don't talk about comfort women. They just feature themselves as the victim. And that's their song and dance. That's what they're doing these days, is being the victim from World War II. So as I said in the earlier question, I'm not optimistic about any changes taking place in Japan.
Yeah, it kind of fascinates me that they're not really trying to formally apologize for this, because it seems that, from an international perspective, that it would be advantageous for them to own up to their crimes, and so they could be more respected and such. But they just, I don't know, seem unwilling to do so.
Well, Germany is a great role model, and you can go throughout Germany and you can see monuments to this and that atrocity committed by the Nazis. And there are the camps where the uh, uh, Jewish people were encamped, and they admit this in Germany. But in Japan, no monuments, no shrine, except for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as if Japan is this innocent country that suddenly gets bombed with atomic bombs. And that's the story they're trying to tell, but it's just quite opposite of the truth and quite opposite of Germany.
Many Japanese politicians tend to support Mark Ramsayer's historical revisionist claims, and in fact, the official Ministry of Foreign Affairs website of the government of Japan, as you probably know, denies the existence of evidence supporting the fact that the comfort women were forcefully taken away, disputes the 200,000 figure for the estimated total number of comfort women, and opposes the use of the expression sex slaves in reference to the comfort women and condemns statues of comfort women built in Japan.
They want the younger generation to be in complete denial of all of the bad things that Japan did. And Japan did a lot of really bad things during World War II. A lot of atrocities. The 731 medical experiments were as bad as anything that the Nazis did. And yet the Japanese want their society to be clean and pure and innocent, and especially for the next generation to be innocent. The trouble is that if you deny history, you repeat history. And if you deny history, the Japanese will probably go marching down that same path again in future generations. So again, I'm not optimistic about Japan.
And you mentioned these specific Japanese war crimes that happened, and even like during the Imjin Wars, they used to like cut off the ears of Korean soldiers or peasants, and put those down and mark them as records for how many they killed. So do you think like in reference to like war crimes and such, while all countries do commit war crimes in times of war, do you think the Japanese have perhaps been excessive in their past?
Well, when we talk about the Japanese and Korean relationship, the Japanese, many of them dislike Koreans. And I can't understand why, because the Japanese have been so cruel to Koreans. Going back to the Hideyoshi invasion, Hideyoshi was just an animal. He killed so many people in Japan, and that wasn't enough. He had to send his soldiers to Korea, and he killed between 2 and 4 million people. You talked about cutting off the ears or the nose of people in Korea. That's how the soldiers got paid. They turned in an ear and they got 50 pieces of silver. The ears then were valuable. And so the Japanese kept the ears and they shipped them back to Japan. There's a mound, a huge mound in Kyoto, Japan, of Korean ears and noses. Yeah, that's an atrocity, but that it doesn't compare to the numbers of people that were just killed and slaughtered. And they burned everything. You can't find much in Korea, except in a remote temple way up in the mountains that was made before the Japanese invaded, because they burned everything. It was just a horrible, horrible thing. So yeah, the Japanese-Korean history is pretty bad, and it's all on the side of the Japanese.
So for my next question, supporters of the government, the Japanese government, and Japanese right-wing groups supported Ramsayer and took to the internet to espouse their support for his article. They point to previous resolutions and apologies, such as the 1993 Kono Statement and 2015 Japan-South Korea Comfort Women Agreement to discredit the Comfort Women's struggle for justice, despite the fact that the Japanese Diet has never ratified them and that the 2015 agreement has fallen through. They also claim no concrete evidence exists to prove that the comfort women were sex slaves. And also, when I was doing my research, I've noticed that there have been some activist groups, even within Japan, that have tried to, speak in favor of the comfort women. And so, do you think that these groups in the future? You said that you're probably not too optimistic about that, but do you think they'll ever be able to? I don't know, maybe overpower the conservative factions?
I've said a couple of times that I'm not optimistic, but I should quote Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin Luther King said the arc of history swings toward justice. And if that's the case, perhaps eventually Japan will swing to a point of honesty and honest history and looking at their past atrocities. But it's not swinging that way now. The arc of history in Japan is swinging away from truth and away from what really happened.
And so for my final question, both Koreans and Japanese harbor a mutual dislike that stems from the Japanese occupation of Korea between 1910 and 1945, and going further back because of the Imjin War invasions. This mutual animosity has hampered cooperation between the two nations. Do you think South Korea and Japan will ever reconcile the differences? And what do you think they should do in order to improve their relations?
We come together a little bit from time to time, and business, mutual business interest drives cooperation between Korea and Japan. And as long as each side needs the other for developing a business, that's a positive thing for both countries. But the animosity runs deep. Japan has done a lot of really horrific things in Korea. And until Japan behaves like Germany and says, yeah, our ancestors did a lot of bad things and we are sorry. If that can ever happen, then I think we can see some real progress. Someday,
Right.
someday.
Yeah. Someday, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your questions. I've been wanting to make a video about the impact of the Ramsayer study. The fact that the study was debunked by scholars all over the West, but the study has great value in perpetuating the historic myth that Japan is trying to create about Japanese innocence, and that they were the victim of World War II. And nothing could be further further from the truth. The Japanese were the perpetrator of World War II, not the main victim. The victims were Korea and China and Southeast Asia and Pearl Harbor and the United States. And that's the historic truth. So eventually truth will win out. Truth will win out eventually. That's my point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for this very insightful and thoughtful conversation. I do believe that this is an old issue, but is a young person's problem. More young people should have input in these negotiations between South Korea and Japan. Not just young Koreans or Japanese, but also many Korean Americans and other young people from all over the world. I believe that there are many young Korean Americans interested in this issue, but they might not know how to take action. I hope that maybe after listening to this video and hearing our discussion, more young people will gain some useful tips and inspiration to take part in the comfort women's struggle for justice.
So thanks, Joshua, for your questions. And we'll load this up and see what our friends on YouTube have to say about it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.